Agricultural Organization of the United Nations and the Future Food Institute. Today's both session will focus on biodiversity, where thanks to our partner, Crop Trust, an international organization working on safeguarding crop diversity, our students will cook from diverse ingredients together with change makers and share insightful bites on how we can work together to protect our crop diversity for the future. Let me introduce you Conor Spacey, the executive chef of FoodSpace in Dublin, Ireland. He is also part of the Chef Manifesto. His recipe today is based on the Future 50 foods. And now, without any further ado, I would like to hand over to Conor and the participants.
Thank you very much. Hello, everybody. I presume you can all hear me fine. Thank you I'm delighted to be here today and to kind of showcase some really biodiverse ingredients, part of the Future 50 foods, but also a very kind of close to my heart here in Ireland, but I know internationally and globally are part of a bigger food system. And I think just before I get into the ingredients, when we talk about biodiversity and what it means, in layman terms, to me, biodiversity means variety of life here on the planet. And when we look at ingredients and we look at a food system, while we recognize that we look at a local food system, we also need to look at a global food system and what is biodiversity in terms of global food. And just to show you some of what we are working with here today on these ingredients. Everything here, and one in particular that is not Irish that I want to talk about is the sweet potato. But everything else I've got here, so I've got kale, which comes in a huge amount of varieties. We're using curly kale here today because in Ireland this is bang on right in season and very good for you, packed with nutrients. But you could also, as I said before, swap this out for like other greens like spinaches or pak choy and so on, depending on where you are and what's available to you. Here I've got barley. Barley as a grain might not be recognized in every country, but this is something very close to my heart. It took me up to 6 months to source barley here in Ireland that I could actually use in our restaurants. And while we grow a lot of barley and very easily do so, the history behind it is that 70% of all the barley grown in Ireland goes to Diageo, and that's to brew Guinness and lager and so on. And the other 30% is actually used for animal feed, to feed cattle, for us to eat the cattle. And it never made sense to me that we were not eating this direct here in Ireland. And a lot of the barley and grains that are sold here in Ireland are imported from further afield in the likes of France and the UK and so on. So this is something very close to my heart. I pre-cooked this here. I just blanched it, and this barley has the husk on as well. So it's packed with nutrients, packed with flavor and so on. And then seaweed. We have two different types here. I have a kelp seaweed, and I have this, which is a sea lettuce. And that's kind of just rinsed, wash, and it actually has the same texture of lettuce, but it's got that umami, fantastic flavor. And seaweed is recognized as a Future 50 food, but also plays a big history here in Ireland. Long before the superfood of its time, when the potato came from America into Ireland in the 1600s, seaweed was a very important part of our diet, that not only did we eat in an abundance with grains and seafood, we also use it to fertilize soil. And in more modern times, that has stopped. And for me, it's a big thing to start to reintroduce seaweed into people's diets and so on. Sweet potato is, obviously it's not Irish, and it's not grown here in Ireland either. But the reason I included it is because it is part of the Future 50 foods, and in certain countries is grown very much sustainably, and it's also lovely to eat. So I just wanted to show a variety. While everything else here is Irish, the sweet potato is not, but they're all part of a more diverse diet and a more diverse planet. So the recipe today, I'm just going to move this back up a bit so you can see what's going on. The recipe today I've kept really, really simple, just so that it gives us time to talk, it gives us time to just taste it and not be standing over the stove all day. So I was going to move this over to the side. My potatoes, I've washed, I always keep the skin on. So I've literally washed these and I've just diced them. With my kale, you see that there. So with my kale, I have literally removed them from the stalk and just shredded them into little pieces like this. And depending on the variety of kale you have, well, you know, but they'll all slice up into these small slices. Worth noting with the root. So as I just pull the kale off the root, these are gorgeous. Rather than throwing them out, they're lovely roasted in the oven. We call them like kale ribs, because at the end of the day, it's kind of like, you know, it's the same idea as you would use with pork or beef ribs. So this is the stem off the kale. We rub them with spices, we roast them in the oven, and they make it a great snack. So rather than any waste or throwing them out, perfect for that. I don't need them for this recipe, but that's the idea behind that. The barley, as I said, has just been blanched. It looks a little different because the husk is on it, which again intensifies the flavor and is much better for you. And then my seaweeds, I just have blanched the kelp, and the lettuce I don't need to, because that's just going to be added in at the very, very end. Also, I'm using rapeseed oil to cook it. Rapeseed oil here in Ireland is grown readily available. It's grown in a lot of farms, but also in part of the biodiversity. As rapeseed oil is growing, it's a huge contributor to the bee population. So as it grows through its stages, it adds a lot more biodiversity around other plants around the fields where it grows, and also with the bee population. It's also far healthier for you than olive oils, and packed with nutrients. So for me here in Ireland, we would always cook using rapeseed oil. There are other byproducts from rapeseed oil as well that we can use within our kitchens and so on, but that just to give you an idea of what we're cooking it. So,
if you don't mind interrupting a tiny bit, because our participants are coming from different areas of the world, I would love to hear, at least those who are cooking with us, what kind of grain are they using? Because that was also part of their preparation, to find the grain or ingredient what is more local and sustainable for their region. Sorry, I'm not sure. Can you repeat? Amanda, what grain are you using?
There is a local barley, but it comes late. I don't have it yet. So I'm using a corn rice.
All right.
Because I read the substitute could be brown rice, but what I have is corn rice.
Mm-hmm.
brilliant.
Very good. What about the others?
I'm actually using a barley that's locally grown here in Finland, but it's got the husk removed, so it just looks like pearls, basically, white pearls. So
I'm using lentils that I get in my CSA here in Bologna.
Oh, thank you, Lauren. Thanks. Sorry, I didn't want to interrupt, just to hear maybe different ingredients.
No, absolutely. Yeah, no, that's brilliant. And that is the thing, and that's what's great about biodiversity, is that while it's global, it's also about taking it and making it local as well. So it's kind of looking at ingredients globally, but also what's close to you that is biodiversity in terms of how it's grown and what it's done for the planet and so on. So it is important to, no matter where you are on the planet, of course, you're going to have access to different ingredients. And I mean, I suppose when we look at what's available to us in terms of species and plants, there's over 30,000 varieties. Yet, you know, what is it? Is it 6 or 7 is our main diet, and that's why to avail of these ingredients anywhere on the planet is brilliant. You know, but to switch them to what's more local to the area you're in. So okay, so we're gonna heat up, get our pan nice and hot, and I'm adding in some rapeseed oil here. So I've cut these quite small because I want them to cook quick enough. As I said, the skin is on them, and I've just washed them like that. Hopefully my pan is hot there now. Yeah. So in they go. Straight away, we're going to season them. And even when it comes to seasoning, my salt, here in Ireland, we always use Irish sea salt because it's harvested throughout the entire coast. So straight away, I'm going to add in salt and pepper, and then my spices. So I have some cumin and I have some sumac, and these are just going to add to the flavors. And what we're doing here as we're cooking, we're layering up flavors. So oil, potato, salt, pepper, and then straight in with the spices. I'm using a teaspoon and a bit actually of the cumin. I love cumin, so just a little bit on that. And then with my sumac, I'm just using a teaspoon and a half on that. So that's my spices in.
Sorry to interrupt. I was just wondering, I couldn't find sumac at my local store, so I was wondering what I could use in substitute for it, because I've never used it.
Like, sumac has a lovely lemony flavor, but if you can't find it, you could use it like a paprika, and you could actually use some lemon juice as well, and it'll give you that lovely flavor that the sumac is giving off. The sumac has a unique flavor in that way, but it is quite lemony. So you could substitute it with another spice like, similar to like a paprika or something like that, and then fresh lemon juice if you have it.
Perfect, thank you.
No problem. And what we're trying to achieve here now is to get a nice color. So we have the spices, and as the spices are cooking, they're starting to release their flavor. The pan, they're starting to caramelize and get that color, and that's important because the caramelization on the potatoes from the spices is going to add another depth of flavor. And I just show you there, we're getting this lovely color coming through on that, and they're already starting to soften. And it's always important when working with spices like this that you fry the spices to release that flavor. Adding spices, certain spices at the end won't give you what we're looking for here today. And that's why we're starting with the spices to get all that lovely flavor released. So I've got a good color on that. You can see there now, it's nicely caramelized. The potatoes they're not cooked yet, but they're taking on the color I want. So next stage is I'm going to add in the kale. And as you see, the kale is already kind of chopped here. It looks quite a lot, but it is going to break down. As we cook it, it's going to start to shrink and so on. So I'm literally adding in my kale. So at this stage, you can start to turn down the heat a bit, because you don't want the kale to fry as such. You want it more to kind of almost steam in with the heat from the sweet potato, and it's going to take on all the flavor from the spices as well. And you can see where the kale now is getting glossy, it's getting shiny. Again, you could be using spinach or pak choy, so the same will apply. It's starting to, you can see it there where it's starting to break down already. Now, because I'm using kale, it's going to take slightly longer to cook than say spinach or pak choy, or any other green that you're using, because it's a curly kale. It's very close, almost like a cabbage, so it's a bit earthy, a bit chewy. So I need to cook that for a little bit more. What I can do here, for those who are using kale, I'm going to add a little bit of water, and that's just to get the steam going. So that's going to cook that kale a little bit quicker. And kale is a great ingredient, packed with nutrients, packed with flavor. And if you're lucky enough or have an area, even if it's a plant pot, or you have a small garden area or a balcony area where you live, this kale is so easy to grow. It takes no looking after. And as the plant grows, the stem grows really high, and you pick the leaves from the bottom. But the longer the stem grows, it will keep on regrowing the kale plant itself. So you could harvest a single kale for 6 months of the year will give you kale very simply in a box, on a balcony, in a small garden, anywhere at all. No looking after it. So it's such a great plant. And one seed will give you a 6 months harvest. It constantly regrows back. So that's broke down. That's exactly where I want it now. And as I said, if you're using spinach, pak choy, it should be just nice and soft, but you know, and you're getting the flavor. It's taking on the spices and so on. So then you're going to your grains. So you have different grains of lentils and so on, and barley. So literally, I'm adding that through, and this is going to give us. This has already been pre-cooked here. If you're using lentil grain that hasn't, they should cook quick enough in this anyway. I'm stirring that through, and the reason I'm adding the barley, while it's a fantastic ingredient packed with nutrients, I'm also looking at textures within the dish. So because I've got the lovely spicy now sweet potato, I've got the kale, which is still going to have a little bit of crunch to it, and then I'm going to have the nutty kind of barley. So the textures of this and the layers of flavor is what we're looking for here. And again, all this is plant-based. If you have a variety of a diet and you're not vegetarian or vegan, this is a lovely dish as well, served with like grilled fish, grilled sustainable fish, served with chicken, or it's lovely even as a brunch dish with like a fried egg on top. So depending on what you enjoy, and food is about enjoyment, but also about being sustainable. So this is coming along really, really nicely. And as I said, it is a quick dish. You can see now the colors and so on that we're getting on this. So I've got the spices. We've got the lovely kale now that has nicely softened, but not where it's overcooked. It's still got a lovely texture and flavor to it. The barley has just heated back up through. It's taken on more of the flavor. So it's got great textures and so on there. And now with your seaweed. So depending, guys, on what seaweed you have, if it's a dried seaweed, you could have soaked it, or you can just break it up into this. It basically in your hand. If you're using sheets of seaweed, you can just break it up into your hand. And what that's going to do, what the seaweed is doing here, it's adding fantastic nutrients to the dish, but it's also giving that umami flavor that you won't get from adding more salt or spices or anything like that. It's giving this whole background flavor hit, which is lovely, and you're incorporating kind of the ocean flavors with the land, and those two together just create this fantastic flavors. So while that's cooking down, I also had on it about an aioli or a mayonnaise. So basically this one is a traditional kind of garlic mayonnaise that I make. So it's using egg yolks. I have rapeseed oil. I have a little bit of mustard and a little bit of vinegar. And then I add in freshly chopped garlic. I'm going to use this over on the top. This is going to bring it all together at the end. You could also blend seaweed through this. I've done that before as well. It's a fantastic seasoning towards the end of the dish. And if you haven't, guys, like a shop bought mayonnaise will just do the same. It's just going to add this flavor at the end. So this is cooked down. I was going to check that my potatoes and everything are where I want them to be. Just a few more minutes. What I'm going to do, guys, if you find that your potatoes still have a bit of a crunch to them and you want it to cook a bit more, very easy just to put a lid, even whether it's a pan or a pot, just to sit it on top for a couple more minutes. And that's going to soften up, it's going to use the steam to soften up the potatoes. Mine still have just a little bit of bite still in them. So we're going to leave that there for a couple of minutes. Has anyone any questions or any comments to make while are we all too busy cooking?
I have an electric burner, so it's taking a while for my pan to heat up. So I'm a bit behind. So I'm busy cooking.
No problem at all.
What is another root vegetable that you could substitute if you don't have sweet potato?
Lauren, I think you were not on mute, so we could hear you. Conor, there was a question, what other root vegetable could be used instead of sweet potatoes?
Absolutely. Any variety of root vegetables could be used. As I said, I picked the sweet potato because it's listed as a Future 50 food in terms of sustainability. I myself would have used, we're right here in Ireland, we're right in potato season of two varieties, Queen's potatoes and Rooster potatoes at the moment. So normally I would have used them in it. But whatever your favorite root vegetable is, use it. And that's the whole idea behind dishes like this. While it's about sustainability and biodiversity, it's also about enjoyment. So I would think that any of your favorite root vegetables, I personally myself, I love parsnips, I love celeriac. They would go really, really well either or in this. But carrots or anything like that is fine. And very much about what's in season, where you are on the planet at this time can be incorporated into this. And the same would apply because you're getting a root vegetable is going to give you the same textures at the end, which is what we're looking for here at the sweet potato is giving us.
Thank you. And I took your advice and cracked an egg because it is breakfast time here. So I'm looking forward to that.
Excellent. Yeah. And that's what I would do. Like a lovely breakfast brunch is an egg on top. And normally for me, I would use, when this dish is complete, I would do this as family dining. I would sit the pan in the middle of the table and we just eat out of it that way. So it's real, that kind of casual, tasty kind of snack. So those potatoes are nice and soft now. So depending on your seaweed, I have the sea lettuce. This doesn't take a lot of cooking. And I know a lot of you probably wouldn't have been able to get this. I have it like, I literally live on the coast here. So the beach is like 5-minute walk. So I just got that last night as the tide was going out. This is actually like a lettuce that you would eat growing on the land, but it grows just close to the shore. And as the tide goes out, you have access to take it. It's absolutely gorgeous. But at this time, guys, whatever your seaweed is, you can add that in now just to give, as I say, this is going to give that lovely umami flavor. So you're getting the sea salt, you're getting that kind of sea flavor that you might get from fish and so on, or shellfish, but without having to eat the fish or shellfish. But as I said, this is also a great dish to have to accompany, you know, grilled fish, chicken. So it's really up to whatever you guys are eating, whatever your favorite kind of foods are. And already, I don't know, because it's a fresh seaweed, I'm getting straight away as that seaweed starts to heat, I'm getting the whole smell of the ocean. It's like actually kind of being on the beach. So cooking with seaweed is absolutely gorgeous. And as I said, it plays a huge part in Irish history, but also globally, seaweed is plentiful. I mean, look at the size of the oceans on the planet. Seaweed is plentiful. It's very, very good for you, and it's very, very sustainable. And I think introducing that a lot more into people's diets is also a plus. And it can come in many forms. I mean, you don't have to be an island, or you don't have to have an ocean to the left or right of you. I mean, even if you're landlocked where you are on the planet, seaweed can be available through, you know, different forms of powders, through a dried form and so on. And it's just a matter then of either soaking it or using it dried, whichever, depending on the dishes. But it's so, so good for you. And the flavors it adds to dishes is fantastic. So we're kind of there now. I just want to check and see how we're doing here on that. So I've got all these layers. That's worked really, really well. So depending, guys, I don't know where you guys are on it. Let me know if your potatoes or anything is still if it's still a little bit hard or not. If it is, as I said, you can put a lid on it, or you can add in a bit of stock or a bit of water just to steam it like that, which will release more flavor as well from the pan, but it will also just help it to finish cooking. And you can see there how it's looking. And as I said, for a lovely brunch dish, I would crack 2-3 eggs into that just there now. and sit down in the middle of the table and eat away on that. It's fantastic. Or you could serve it as is. You can serve it with you know, your favorite chicken or fish or whatever it is that you enjoy eating. So for me, I'm ready to plate this guy up, and then I'm gonna flavor it with the mayonnaise at the end. So it's a very, very simple dish. But yet in terms of sustainability, in terms of biodiversity, we have fantastic ingredients that we're using here that, you know, don't get used enough, to be honest with you, and should. And no matter where, as I said, no matter where you are on the planet, you can swap out grains for grains that are more sustainable to you. The same with the green leaves and so on. You know, depending on where you are, biodiversity to me, it does mean it is a global food system, and it is about globally, but it's also about thinking locally. And there, guys, is my interpretation of what we're cooking. And as I said, you can add, you can take from this. It's a very, I kept it very, very simple to give us the opportunity to talk more about biodiversity and all as well. So if you're, let me know how you're doing. I see some of you are still cooking away there. I hope that you, it's all working out for you.
Mine is definitely still on the hard side, but yours look lovely. So.
And that's why, and maybe a lot of it down to the size that you cut them or whatever. And as I said, if you added a little bit of stock or whatever, it would just quicken that process.
Yeah.
And but it's really, really tasty. And I suppose like when we look at these ingredients that we started with, you know, they're very common ingredients in terms of availability globally, but yet we don't use half enough of them. And to me, biodiversity is essential. It's essential for us as a planet. It's essential for our survival, as well as the planet's survival, as well as animal survival. It's a must. And I think we need to really look at what we eat and why we eat it, and look more around what's available to us where we are globally, and how that food or that ingredients are produced. You know, are they produced sustainably, or are they wild foods like seaweeds and so on? Depending on where you are, the planet is like our larder. We have such great varieties of food available, but we just need to use more of it, and we need to be less influenced by large companies that are there to influence us by specific products made from specific types of food or crops, and biodiversity and local foods and seasonal foods taste far better than any other food you can get. Its flavors are fantastic. It's when you're working with seasons and you're eating food that's bang in season, that's Mother Nature telling you this is ready to eat. This is food at its best. And I think that's really important. And eating within the seasons is how we are and how we can be more sustainable. And I don't know about all of you, but I know definitely much on this side of Europe and over here in Ireland, we have a total disconnect to what our seasons are and what's growing when and when we should only eat it. And a lot of that is down to supermarkets and so on that have, you know, here in Ireland would say we'd have strawberries available 12 months of the year, while our season in Ireland is only 2 months. So we're only just in season now for strawberries. And depending on our weather, it'll go to end of August maybe, but yet we'll have strawberries 12 months of the year. So if I ask somebody on the street here, I'd say, when are strawberries available? They go, well, always. Because we have this connection that food should always be available to me when I want it. When we should think differently and think more about, I should only be eating food when it's available to me and not when I want it. So for here, this side of the planet, eating strawberries at Christmas time or January makes no sense. But yet that's the biggest selling fruit in the supermarkets here in Ireland at that time of the year. So it's very much about paying attention to your ingredients and creating dishes from what they are, rather than wanting to create dishes because you think it will taste good or look good on a plate, but yet is not sustainable. It's not biodiversity. It's not good for the planet. It's not good for you. So it's changing that way of thinking around food and letting food dictate when it's ready to be eaten, as opposed to us wanting to eat it whenever we want to eat it, if that makes sense. How is everyone doing? Are we kind of...
I can see Amanda and Radhika already plated, right?
Yeah, and the sweet potato, we have a different version. There is the pink one and the yellow one.
Brilliant.
Nice. Did all of you guys manage to get seaweed, or was that something rather difficult to source at your locality?
It's okay.
I managed to get it, but you know, it's still pretty expensive to get here. So I got some dried stuff from the Asian supermarket. So I don't know if there's some suggestions for what could be used instead, that would be great, because I don't think it's, you know, I don't think it's very sustainable to be, you know, importing Japanese seaweed.
Yeah,
all the way.
absolutely. Yeah. I mean, there is, and I suppose it's more specialty stores whereby you can get a seaweed powder as well, and depends on, again, it depends on where you are, but there are, and health shops would have, would sell seaweed in different forms. The nori can be a bit, I know you can soak it or whatever, but it's not going to give you the same flavor as a type of seaweed. And what I mean by a type of seaweed, like seaweeds also, like any kind of plant or vegetable, have seasons. So depending on the time of year, depends on when different types of seaweed should be eating. Here in Ireland alone, there's about 20 varieties of seaweed that grows on our coast. But some are available different times of the year. And okay, that's more something I'm used to because I live on the coast. I know we don't all, but I mean, that's what I mean about these varieties and what's available. I suppose in terms of a substitute, I don't know actually something that's going to give you that same umami flavor that we're looking for in a dish, because it's going to give you that hit of the ocean and that hit of sea salt that kind of brings the entire dish together. So off the top of my head, I don't know of a substitute that could be used for seaweed, to be honest with you. As I said, because it's got such a distinct flavor, and depending again on the seasons, depends on what seaweed you can pick, but they're still going to, each seaweed is going to have a different flavor compound, but they're all going to have that same umami kind of flavor, if that makes sense. And different seaweeds do different things, different varieties. We have another variety of seaweed here, Carragline, that we use as a thickener. So instead of say gelatine or anything like that, we use a seaweed. And in the same way, we can use that to set desserts and so on, and use for anything that you would use a gelatin for. But that seaweed is really just for that. It's not so much edible and so on. There's different types of kelp or rack seaweed. So there's a lot of different varieties of seaweed, and that's what makes it so sustainable as well. But I do get, obviously, that it's not accessible to everybody.
Great. We had a question coming from Arina asking if, oh, wait a second, kombu was the word of the ingredient, Arina? Could be used as a substitute.
What is it? Sorry.
One second.
It's a type of seaweed. You mentioned like nori doesn't go really well with the recipe. Does kombu, you think kombu would work with this? I
think it would, yeah. In terms of, yeah. And in terms of flavor as well, I mean, and this is the good thing about food, because if you think about food is very much personal to what we all enjoy, and like everyone on this meeting enjoy different types of ingredients. And it's swapping out things for what you enjoy. Like there might be something here that you might go, well, I don't like kale, so I'm not going to use that. But as suggestions, like I'm going to use spinach, or I'm going to use pak choy and so on. Swapping out barley or swapping out seaweed to something that you enjoy but is also accessible is the great thing about food, that we can do that. But I also think that it's swapping out an ingredient that is sustainable to ensure that we swap it out for another ingredient that is just as sustainable, or if not more sustainable, depending on where you are. But that's the enjoyment of food, is that it can be tailored to everyone's personal taste, but also tailored to geographically where we are.
So for somebody who doesn't have access to seaweed at all, like for example, in India, most of our seaweed is imported. I don't think we find Indian. So what do you think would work to kind of compensate that umami flavor that you're talking about? Maybe like a little bit of miso in the mix, or
exactly, and that's because that's the flavor you're trying to replicate in a dish.
Right.
And in fairness, so in India there could even be certain different spices that you could use at the start. Like, okay, I had cumin and sumac, but you have such a great variety of spices that maybe changing the spices at the beginning would substitute the umami flavor that we look for at the end as well. And it's that kind of, I call it playing around with dishes and ingredients to give you the finished, flavors that you're looking for. And that can be different. Like as we said, it's a global larder, but it's different depending exactly where you are on the planet. So as I said, in India, the fantastic spices all you have could actually easily swap out using seaweed and changing some of the spices at the beginning, rather than just having sumac and cumin. There could be other spices that's going to give that more depth of flavor towards the end as well. And that's the enjoyment of food.
Can you talk more about barley?
Yeah, well, I say so. In Ireland, barley is obviously, it's readily available in Ireland in terms of supermarkets and markets and so on. But I would say easily, I did a lot of research into this, and about 95% of what is sold retail in Ireland is imported, mainly from France. Definitely all Europe, some UK as well. So my problem is not always about imported foods, because there's foods here in Ireland that we import, that we will always import, that it's part of our diet. And that's what I mean by a global food system, because like we can't grow tea or coffee or cocoa or spices. So yes, of course we import them. And we will always, it's always part of our diet. But when you have such a grain like barley that's already grown in Ireland, as is wheat and spelt as well, and readily available. But what we're growing here in the country is used as animal feed or used to ferment into beer and so on. And yet everything we consume is imported. It just never made sense to me. And it was only when I started to really look into it and talk directly to growers and farmers, their whole feedback was that there was never a market for their barley here in Ireland, because it was being produced cheaper or brought into the country cheaper than what they were selling it at. And we've had discussions about this before about how, with the movement of food, how can food come into a country from the other side of Europe, the other side of the planet or the world, and be cheaper than what we can produce here. And a lot of that can be down to different trade deals with governments. It can be down to subsidies in different countries. I know, like some countries, for farmers, there are subsidies that cover all their overheads in terms of electricity, in terms of water and power and energy, which is not here in Ireland. So for a farmer to produce something here in Ireland, which doesn't make sense to me, but this is more around economics, it's costing them more than for a farmer to produce on the other side of the world and fly it in. But this is where as I said at the beginning, this is where our whole disconnect and our whole food system is broken, and in some ways never makes sense as to how this can happen. And that's why for me, I was determined to use Irish grains where I could use Irish grains. So obviously we don't grow rice here. So yes, I would use imported rice. But as I said, barley being one, we'd always use Irish barley. We'd only use Irish wheat. And what I mean by that, like a lot of flour for our breads and all is milled here in Ireland, but up to over 80% of the wheat that's used to mill it is not grown in Ireland, which is scary because we grow so much wheat. So there are great farmers and great millers and flour producers here in Ireland that we would search out for and make sure that we only use them. And this to me, as chefs or even just people, just as we all eat food, we need food to survive. And I think putting this, it's not a huge effort, but putting the thought and process into knowing where your food comes from and really searching it out. And I mean, information is readily available to all of us now. I mean, touch of a button and you can find out what's grown and what's where and what's sustainable and what time of the year. But taking that time to work out, if you want to be creative, you want to certain dishes and all that, look at your ingredients and look at how they're produced or where they come from. And as I said, it's not always about being just local food, because there are other foods, fantastic foods across the planet that we all want access to. And of course we should have access to, but it's also looking at them, those other ingredients that are outside of your country that are being imported and wondering, well, how sustainable are they? You know, how are they coming into the country, or how are they grown or harvested in another country where they originate from? So it's not about, I suppose, shutting down borders. Food will always travel. It's a global food system, but it is more about looking at what food is traveling and choosing to buy the right food that's traveling, as opposed to saying, I'm only going to be local. Of course, everyone would only love to be local, but then you're very restricted in the food that's available to you. And what happens when you're moving from one season to another and not everything is available? So of course, food will always be a global food system. Food will always travel. Food will always be imported and exported across the planet. But it's about what that food is and how it gets there and how it was grown or harvested in the first place. And I think that's where decisions we need to make in terms of biodiversity. And it's a responsibility for us, not just as chefs or working in the food system or in that, but it's responsibility for us as humans on a planet that, you know, is in huge danger, and we need to change what we do. So for me, this is a responsibility for everybody, to really look at our food, look at our ingredients, and look at how and what we eat. And then the other side to that is, what about people on the planet that don't have access to food? You know, what about people that are starving? And why is it that we produce enough food on the planet for everybody, but billions go hungry? And this is where, I mean, we could talk about a food system and biodiversity and sustainability all day, because where there's a solution on one side, there's a problem on another, and that will always be there. But I mean, ideally, I mean, when we look at sustainable development goals and ending world hunger by 2030, is that achievable? When we look at the pandemic of COVID-19 at the moment, and we look at war, we look at food being used as a weapon of war and so on, and we look at numbers rising. The latest numbers released from the UN has showed that, you know, obviously from COVID as well, as more and more numbers rising in terms of people going hungry and people starving throughout the planet. So our food system obviously does not work. And I think a lot of people feel that maybe as individuals we're too small to make a change, that we don't have a voice to make a change. And I think that's totally wrong, because I think by us making small changes in our workplace, in our lives, at home, in terms of our ingredients, drives further change up the ladder into large companies and how we buy food. Companies, supermarkets, food producers will only produce the food that's on demand. So for us to change and look at what we're eating and buying and where we're spending our money can have a knock-on effect. So never feel that as individuals here on this call or in this video that we're too small, you know, to make, our voices aren't loud enough. They are loud enough. And having these conversations like we're having today, and having these conversations with other people and carrying these conversations on is what can make change. In terms of our ingredients, in terms of trying to fix our broken food system. And do I think it is fixable? I do. You know, I don't think I'd be as involved in solutions if I didn't. But we do need to accelerate it, and we do need to get to solutions quicker. And that can only be done through collaborations, through helping each other, through looking at what is going on a global scale as well as a local scale to where we are, and sharing ideas and having talks like this. All this contributes to fixing a broken food system. I hope that makes sense. I'm kind of talking for ages.
Of course it does. Thank you so much. I was wondering if everyone could show the result of their cooking session. It would be nice. And if you guys have any further questions, or if you would like to add something to the topic, please feel free to speak up.
I just like to show you the local barley. I mentioned about the local barley. It just arrived, so my cooking didn't use this, but I just would like to show you it's local barley grown
That's
here.
brilliant. And brilliant that you have access to that as well, because not everyone does, and to be able to have access to and use that is what it's all about. You know what I mean? Having access to food locally, and I suppose using that as a priority over other ingredients, because it's there, it's harvested, it's obviously in season, it's ready to be eaten. That's where we should choose what we're doing.
Thank you.
Looks great.
Great. How did your dish work out? Nice. Very good. You are muted.
Great, guys.
There you go. Now I will say sorry for the messy kitchen. Now it's the time to clean up. Turn out well. Yeah. And thank you
really
for leading the class and the talk.
Lauren, can you show yours again, please?
Dish, like the flavors that are in it.
Lauren, can you show yours again, please?
Sure.
Thank you. Easy.
Vivian's plate looked amazing too.
They all look good.
Nice.
Yeah, Greta,
Well
using
done,
yours,
guys.
Lauren.
I hope you enjoy it now as well. I hope you actually like the.
Thanks. I can't wait to try it. We'll see what happens. My boyfriend doesn't like seaweed, so I hope maybe he'll like it like this, but we'll see what happens.
Brilliant.
It's nice to put colors like the tomato, and in my case the orange sweet potato.
Yeah, there's lovely colors then going through it, which is great. That's brilliant.
Great.
If we have time, I have a question that's a little off topic. Is that possible, Julia?
Sure, go ahead.
Hi, so I come from Mumbai. Mumbai is, as everyone knows, it's quite polluted, but if you need something, you can do it, as long as, I mean, it's completely unsustainable in terms of getting what you want in Mumbai, but it's possible. Now, if we talk about metropolitan cities and we talk about landlocked places where the availability of fresh seaweed isn't there, what is your interpretation of Spanish chefs currently using seawater to boost natural umami and as a replacement for salt in their food? And do you think the usage of seawater can be turned into a potential possibility to get the sea flavor as well as get the natural umami and the biological components that natural seaweed would give you, but through the water that it grows in, into landlocked places? And if it is, what kind of health hazards or health barriers do you think we would face as a challenge in doing so?
Good question. And I suppose in terms of seawater, obviously where I'm living on an island. We harvest seawater, and that's where we produce our sea salt. And I would always use sea salt, as I said, because it does give you that umami flavor, but it's also lower in sodium. So as a salt, as a flavor, it's actually healthier for you. In terms of using seawater, I think what the question was it to grow food? Is it as a substitute or?
No, so let's say I can't get seaweed, but I can sell you seawater. So
okay, it will yeah. I mean, I cooked food in seawater before, and it yes, of course, it works. It doesn't give that same umami hit that a seaweed or a sea plant, so to speak, would give, but it's been perfectly fine, and I have used it before, even to cook vegetables and all in to give a bit more flavor to it. But again, in terms of health and so on, you want to be obviously very careful of the ocean itself and whereabouts that ocean is in terms of pollution and so on. Unfortunately, that is something we need to consider. Because obviously with seaweeds and so on, before we cook with them, they're well washed or they're blanched or pre-boiled and so on to make them safer. I don't know in terms of oceans on a global scale how that would work, but I do know that here in Ireland, yes, seawater, especially on the west coast of Ireland, is harvested on a daily basis for salt. So salt is extracted from it for us to cook with, and that's its main use. Beyond that, I haven't seen much more use of it. And I suppose cities and being landlocked is a huge problem in terms of our sustainability. And as the population is growing, and as we are growing towards billions by 2030, 10 billion, it's kind of cities and urban areas is where the population growth obviously is. How do we change that? I don't know. I know there are very good working books out there on how to feed a city. And when we look back in history, obviously that wasn't a problem. And it's more around the population burst now of growth of us, of humans on a planet basis that has brought this problem in terms of food. And I suppose the biggest thing is that we need to ensure that food is available for everybody. So no matter where we are on the planet, and no matter whether we live in a rural or urban area in terms of cities or countryside and all, food needs to be available. And the problem is that it's not available. And I think the first part of fixing a broken food system is ensuring how do we make food available to all. And sometimes you got to look at what comes first. Is it making food available to all, and then going and looking and making sure that the food that's available to all is sustainable? Or is it that food is already there, but it's just not getting to the people? And these are discussions at government levels across the globe, you know, in UN and in all different NGOs and all, is how do we get food to people both in rural and urban areas that don't have access to it, rather through large populations and rather that they're landlocked and geographically where they are. There's a lot of different reasons why it's not there. But what we do know is that as a planet, we produce enough food to feed everybody. So to me, the problem is, why isn't the food traveling to where it needs to travel to? As I said earlier, looking at local food is great, but globally, we have to look at it as a global system. Food will always travel. And the question to me is, why isn't food available to people everywhere? And I think that to me is the first part of solving a food system. you know, in trying to make food readily available, because so many of us haven't got it, you know. I hope that answers your question.
It does, it does. Thank you so much.
Thank you.
Thank you, everyone. Thank you, Conor, for this session. I think at least some of the students have some delicious meal to consume now, and we learned a lot about biodiversity. Thank you again for joining us today.
No problem. Delighted. Thank you very much. Thanks for having me. Thanks, guys.
Thank you, Sharon.